Commander Legends now looming on the horizon like a colossal storm of potential flavour, now is the time to look back at the year so far and reflect on all the leaps and risks Magic has taken in 2020. The inclusion of showcase arts, as well as the myriad of other alternate art options in mainline sets and products, has been a wild experiment that has yielded a spectrum of results. But what do we think are the positive takeaways moving forwards, and what would we rather was left behind? Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I am your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we are going to be chatting about predominantly showcase artworks. We did an episode fairly similar to this a few months ago where we had our very first interview with Vorthos Mike. If you didn't know that we had Vorthos Mike on, you've probably not listened to our podcast for the past 6 months where we've mentioned it every single episode that we've had. But yeah, we did have him on. And the purpose of that is because this was kind of at the start. We were in a core area by that point. So we were a few sets into having these available showcase arts. And now we're kind of at the back end of the year. We've had 5 mainline sets. We've had Eldraine, Theros, Ikoria, M21, and Zendikar that all have these showcase arts and all these different kinds of alternate arts that they've been really trying to push out since the alternate art Planeswalkers were popular in the Japanese packs for War of the Spark. So I think this is a good time to kind of have like the first big year. And I know Commander Legends will have some of these in. I mean, that's kind of a given. I mean, we already know that they have the etched foils. That's right, isn't it? That's what they're called, etched foils?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so we know that they're going to be in Commander Legends, but a lot of the content that I know we're doing here on the podcast, and there's a couple of articles that I've written recently where things are kind of doing like the end of the year, and we're only in September, but Commander Legends is going to be such its own world that I think it's almost removed from the rest of what's going on. So you can kind of talk about it in its own like little bubble of what it's trying to achieve. So I think September is kind of acting sort of as like an end of year for 2020, and we can kind of do some roundups here. So we're going to be talking about some showcase, what we kind of feel, some of the other artworks on offer. But before we get to that, like Nathan, you've been playing a lot of EDH recently. Like you've got a webcam, so you've been set up with a webcam set up. Like, how are you finding that?
Don't get me wrong, I went through a stage of not really playing much. I think I had about 2 months of tweaking decks with no real like destination for what was going on with them. So it's quite nice to actually be able to sling things at people again. I got to play my Rakdos deck for the first time in probably about 2 years last night, and he got to do very Rakdosy things. Yeah, it's quite good. I like the. It's funny because the group that we play with is obviously we have a store that we can play with, and obviously we've got the 6 limit rule within. Otherwise, it hasn't really affected kind of how the group plays. But I can't necessarily do that so easily because of my routine. But then they've got a very active community online, and then also within that, if they're not active, they're active with other people outside of the group. So there are a lot of people playing a lot of Magic within this little within our little bubble, which is quite nice.
Yeah, because I set up webcam fairly early, and which allowed me to play with some of the guys from our LGS, and also it's kind of expanded our contact with content creators like all over the world. Like we've got to play with like Magic with Zuby. We've even sort of people closer to home like Total MTG. Like we played a lot with Tap That MTG from Canada, all these different kind of places. I hope they're from Canada. I'm pretty sure. We will say, I don't know. America, Canada. God, we're going to get eviscerated. But so it's a really important shift for Magic, actually, where we were able to adapt. And this isn't news to anyone, but it was hard for me to see you not being engaging with all of this because you just didn't have a setup. And I know a lot of people, even now, are still clamoring to get a setup because webcams and things were bought out really quickly. So I'm really happy for you that you managed to get a webcam set up so you can actually get some games in. And like you've been going at it hard. Like I know you've been playing sort of every couple of days. You've been getting games.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously so many cool cards have come out in the last few sets that it would have been a massive disservice not to be able to like test them out and use them. Like Zendikar Rising being a prime example with these, as I'm sure you're going to talk about in a second, about these lands, the land modal spells and that kind of thing. If you don't get a chance, because obviously we talk weekly about Magic, and if you're not actively engaging with it, whether it's even just from the social point of view of getting other people's opinions, seeing where everyone else's ideas are sitting and other people's experiences, even from that point of view, if you're not tapping into that, it's a really hard thing to talk about openly when you're isolated, because your opinions don't have a chance to express and quantify themselves. You're just kind of like, shouting at a wall and hitting your own echo chamber. But even from a play point of view, being able to get that that ability to test the cards and find. I mean, that's why we play the game, right? We play the game because it's an intellectual adventure. You know, you get to build up decks, test them out, see if they work, tear them apart when they're absolute bollocks, throw them out the window when you get mana screwed 3 games in a row, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, well, we've had so many sets in lockdown now, like, because people, like, at the start of lockdown, I watched a YouTube video the other day where it was filmed in March, and in the YouTube video they were saying, so we're either entering a very small period of disruption or we're entering an incredibly long period of turmoil. And it was just funny how, like, back in March people weren't quite sure what was going to happen, and it was just funny seeing that little time capsule. We've had Ikoria, we've had M21 and Zendikar, and those are just the main sets.
Yeah, got like Jumpstart and all that kind of thing that's managed to come. Well, I say Jumpstart's come out, and as far as England's aware, it's still not available. So
no.
I'm not entirely sure if it actually has been released as a set or if it was some fever dream that Wizards have managed to convince me.
No, the only Jumpstart cards I've seen in paper are the ones that I think people have bought from abroad. But yeah, so yeah, it was cool to see. It's cool to see that you're playing Magic. I'm really kind of happy for you because, to say, I've been jamming webcam games hard, and it's done wonders for, like, my Magic mental health. I want to talk about. I bought some product yesterday, some actual factual paper product yesterday, in the form of the Zendikar Rising bundle. So for those people that don't know, because some people tend to only really buy either single boost packs or booster boxes, bundles are what fat packs used to be, where it's a set of 10 boosters. I think it used to be 9, actually, but they bumped up to 10. Yeah, and then you also get a pack of lands, and what they've started doing since Eldraine is they've included a bundle exclusive alternate art for one of the cards in the set. So, for example, for Eldraine, it was the Piper of the Swarm got an alternate art. For Theros, it was an alternate art of the Spider Legendary. Classification got one. The Pack Leader got one for M21. And in this one, it's Charix, the Raging Isle. So it's an actual factual legendary creature that they've got a bundle exclusive alternate art for. Kakai Kataki is the artist for Charix Raging Isle.
What a name, hey?
I know, yeah, very cool. He's a very good Magic artist as well. And I just wanted to, just a little nudge. If you're, because money's tight at the moment, right? Like, everyone, people are losing their jobs, the economy's in the toilet, all this kind of thing. And booster boxes are not prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, but for a lot of people, including myself, I know that they're just outside of the range of something you can justify every 3 months, right? Even to get one.
Yeah, and the equity on a set like, say, Zendikar Rising, if you are looking financially, it doesn't necessarily work. You can't guarantee you're going to get the same value out of it. So if you're opening it for trades and that kind of thing, you might be making a loss, which obviously in the current climate isn't something you want to be investing in.
Exactly. And, like, this isn't an MTG Finance podcast by any means. I mean, God, we're the fucking furthest thing from an MTG Finance podcast. But what I'm suggesting to people is that if you are getting the itch to open up more than just the odd booster pack, but you really can't justify getting a box, I would suggest getting a bundle. And not only because there's, X amount of packs in there and X amount of lands, whatever, but there are some really cool flavor beats that are in there. And I know this sounds like a broken record with us, where everything has to have some sort of flavor, but it's in the name of the fucking podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a
podcast. So deal with it, right? So what they've started doing recently, and they didn't always used to do this. This is why this is so cool. So in the past, they had the card catalogs, which were big, thick books, which had, as you can imagine, all the different cards in. This is when they were still fat packs.
Yeah, and they did all the stuff that you didn't win.
Yeah, the last one they did. I'm just looking at my my sort of stack of them now. The last one they did was War of the Spark was the last one to have one of these catalogs, right? And in the catalogs, they did have a rundown of lots of different flavor beats. So they had a bunch of showcase cards. They showed you which ones were the showcase cards. Sorry, not the showcase, story spotlight cards. They showed you what all the different tribes were in a set. They gave you rundowns of some of the legendary creatures, all this kind of things. There was lots of lore packs in there. They don't do the card catalogs anymore, which is why they've put that resource into giving you an extra booster pack, which is what you're getting back for your money. Which, whatever, for a booster pack product is, I think, fine, whatever. But what they have started doing is they've started including little inserts into the booster packs. Sorry, into the bundles. God, there's so many different product names. Into the bundles that are essentially like an extra little bit of flavor. So in the M21 one, for example, they gave you a timeline of Teferi's life, like something you'd find in a museum. So it's like in this area, section of Dominaria, in this timeline, he did this, and then in this year he did that, and this is where Zalfir got phased out, and this is when he got all depressed and went on exile, and this is when he came back, and he did like a little through line. So if you weren't up on who the character was, as such a central character to M21, you could figure out what was going on. And in this one, they included a little excerpt, and it was just really light, really sort of, silly flavor, but it was so good for the set. It was a pullout, a leaflet that was essentially like I'm going to describe it again as a catalog of all the essential adventuring gear for if you're going to be traversing the floating skyclaves of Zendikar. So it had loads of illustrations. There was like 30, 40 things on this little pullout. Art by Wayne Reynolds, so surprise art by Wayne Reynolds in this set in the form of this excerpt. And he's obviously really good at illustrating equipment and weaponry and all that kind of thing. It's one of the things he's known for. And then they'd have a little number next to each illustration. And then in the sort of tab below would show you what that thing was. So it'd be, like sky hooks or assorted medicinal potions or, rope and all this kind of thing. And it was just a really nice, really lighthearted bit of flavor, which you wouldn't have gotten anywhere else. It's only in the bundle. This is all just to say the bundles are actually a really good product that I think get overlooked because they're like a baby version of the booster boxes.
Yeah, they've
also
got a lot of care and attention put into them.
They do a bit, and the boxes themselves, like they've been using key art all the way up until M21 on the boxes, which is obviously great. But in M21 and Zendikar Rising, they've gone back to using a much more simplified design for the actual art on the boxes. So on Zendikar Rising, it's the really cool, like emerald green with a Planeswalker symbol and the kind of geometric pattern put into the background. And they're just a bit more timeless. Like I can have this on my shelf for however long the game's going on for, and I don't have to get bored of the key art for the set that doesn't exist anymore. Like I have this kind of, simpler, more graphic designing looking thing. Yeah, I think they're great. I just think they're great. And I'd implore you to buy them. Yeah, and that's it. Cool. Well, that's 15 minutes of our podcast talking about stuff that we weren't planning to talk about today. You can tell we put a lot of effort into this particular outline. So yeah,
I think this is nice. We were saying that, like, obviously we had several weeks of balls to the walls talking about spoilers and getting super hype about cards and having some story to talk about. Obviously, we're still going to put off talking about the story as a whole until it's over, just because it makes it feel less disjointed. And we do have a conversation we want to have about the modal spells, for example. But considering because some episodes we end up having to sit for like a good several hours, of unpaid attention to a Word document going through and trying to justify your opinions about things when you have barely enough time to comprehend what they are in the first place is a bit galling sometimes, whereas having a little chit-chat natter about something is not only the reason why we wanted to do this in the first place, because we just have chit-chat natters about most subjects, and we don't actually do that very often in this podcast, where we just throw out a general, like an opinion, or a stance, and try and break it down and see where our opinions lie on it, because that's mostly, pretty subjective, and not everyone wants to just hear what we think about things. But also sometimes it is just nice to chew the hay, because otherwise you don't have enough time to reflect back. You're always looking forwards, and then before you know it, it's been 2 years and you can't remember stuff that happened a year ago.
So yeah, well, let's do that then. Let's look back at this year. Let's look back at the year of the showcase, because as much as this has been the year of Commander as designated by Wizards of the Coast, it's also been the year where they've really pushed the boat out with artworks. And this isn't news to like long-time listeners of our show. I think every sort of like 2 or 3 episodes we talk about the artwork, but that's only because there's been such an explosion of it. They've really thrown the shit at the wall, though, to see what sticks. Like, I drew up a Word document. This is a short one across the 5 sets that we're going to talk about. And just the amount of different styles and different variations that are in each one is staggering. I mean, like, in this Zendikar one, I put down 5 different bullet points of things that you can get. And that's the same for M21 and Ikoria. Like, it's a lot, man, and we're not even talking about Double Masters, which was obviously the set of alternate art,
Yeah, I think those technically count as showcase, the box topper full art versions, because when I was looking on the Magic Wiki, it states it as a showcase, but we're not going to talk about that specifically. No,
we're not going to talk about that. So just to give people a clarification of like the different what we're talking about and like the different terminology we're going to use, because there's lots of different shit. The showcase arts are the ones that we've designated to be where they've had like a cycle of something, and it's the set specific kind of fancy artwork that kind of ties into the themes of the set. So for example, in Throne of Eldraine, it was the adventure cards and it was the kind of fairy tale border and fairy tale style artworks. Those are the showcases, right? Then you have the what I'm calling the stretched art rares, which is where from Eldraine onwards they've given all the rares of the set what they've called an extended art, so where it's just either side of the regular art box, they've cut out the border, and they've said, "Oh, the art's been extended," when in actuality it's been
just
stretched.
been
This is an issue we will talk about later on because that's a point of contention. And then instead of saying things are full art, because there's a contention here, I've said things that have the art where they get rid of the black border and most of the frame. We're referring to them as borderless. Now, the reason that I'm calling them borderless as opposed to full art is because if you look at something like a full art Zendikar land, there is still a border and a frame there. They haven't cut those out. But what it is that they've shown the full amount of the art that was submitted to Wizards of the Coast, or at least as much as they can fit on, right? So it's not that the card is fully art, it's that the full art is on the card.
Yeah, compare that to, like, say, the Unstable lands, where they didn't have any border whatsoever, and the island went all the way up to the, like, all the coloration went right up to the edges.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a borderless full art, because the border really, in sort of nitpicky terms, refers to the black edge around the card, or the gold or white one, depending where you're getting them from, silver one. The frame is the kind of graphic that kind of, frames the rest of the card, and then on the outside you have the border. So if we're referring to things as borderless or semi-borderless, that's what we're talking about. It's what most people would call the full frame card, but it's just it's just a little bit of a nitpick there that I think people should be aware of, and it will fit into some of the Zendikar cards. So that'll be a nice lead in. So when I opened up this bundle, I got a whole bunch of booster packs and I cracked them, and one of the things that I was really surprised to get, and this is one of the alternate art things, was a borderless rare flip land. So the one that I got, I'm literally just getting it now, is the Branchloft Pathway, Boulderloft Pathway. So the green-white rare modal dual-faced land card, or whatever the hell they're trying to call them nowadays. And yeah, it's rad. And like this is the borderless, what people would call full art. But it's interesting that it's not full art, because whereas the full art lands don't have anything in the artwork covering up the artwork, and then they have the frame with the mana symbol at the bottom, which like marginally covers up the full art, the artwork. They've elected on these rare lands to have the text box on both sides, and the only fucking thing in the text box is tap add a green. Like it's tiny. Why did they put the text box on there? What they could have
done is, how on the in that box it has the what's on the other side, land, tap.
Yeah, sure.
What they could have done is had that instead, because you already know what's on the other side. I mean, I guess the whole point is that if you might forget what was on the other side of it.
No. But like, what they should have done is they should have had the tap add green, and then the little grey graphic which has what shows you on the other side, which is tap add white for Branchloft Pathway. They should have just had that either side of what is normally the mana symbol on the full art lands anyway.
No,
instead, they put a huge box which covers up a whole third of the artwork, and then put tiny bit of writing in there. Or, do you know what? Fucking, here's an idea. Put some flavor text in there.
Yeah. That I agree with, because there is this massive weird blank space of equity, because I get that they wanted to make it, for me, this idea of add blue or add white, add green, full stop, that just breaks my brain a little bit, because obviously I've been playing, as we worked out yesterday, I've been playing for a full adult life now. I've been playing for 18 years of Magic, and I was always used to your mana pool. And the thing is, I get that terminology was confusing and alienating for some players. It's the same like with a stack. You very rarely mention the stack, even though it exists. And the mana pool, you very rarely mention, even though it exists. Now, I'm sorry, if it still exists, eventually you're going to have to mention it. Because when people go, oh, what do you mean add blue? Oh, you're adding blue to the mana pool. If you have to justify it every time you say it, then you probably should just keep it on the page anyway. But for cards like this, the equity that it saves is worse than if it hadn't saved the equity of space. It feels like there's clearly a point of where they could have just cut that box down the middle and just had all of the right hand side just be more artwork. Like, why does it have to be? I mean, I imagine they do have graphic designers and everything that they sit and they probably toil mercilessly trying to get all of these different art styles and borderless and extended arts and everything looking the best that they can. But at any point have they ever gone, so here's a survey. These are all the different styles that we could do. What do the players resonate with most? You know how we say they keep throwing things at the wall? We are essentially the wall, whether or not our wallet pays for it or not. they should probably throw them out beforehand and go, well, these are the 3 different styles we're looking at. Which one do you think works best? Which resonates best? And they might end up getting informed about things like, oh, we didn't think the players would understand the card as easily, or you might thought it might have been misleading. And if everyone goes, no, that's fine, that actually looks the best. Like if the echo chamber of wizards is what the reason why we get cards like this, then maybe it is worth branching out and getting some feedback. Going, well, we tried these 3 different styles. Which one do you think is the best one? Instead of going, now we're just going to do this.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, when I opened this out of the booster pack, this modal Flipland, I actually had no idea that they were doing them in a borderless treatment. I thought they were just going to be I thought they were going to be maybe some sort of style of full art, but not quite the borderless way. The same way that when they tried them out for the Ikoria Triomes, this is where they kind of introduced this for the lands, where they had this borderless, almost full art treatment for these things. So I was really excited, and again, they look great, and the artwork is fantastic on them. And I looked at all the rest of the ones that are available, and visually, at first glance, there isn't anything weird about that text box because we're used to seeing it. It's just when you look at it just a little bit closer, and you think, there was a real opportunity here for you to do something.
There shouldn't be a blank space on the card, That's like rule number 1. If there's blank space, fill it with something.
Yeah, it's okay for you to not have the text box there. People understand this isn't a core set. People know what
and it's an alternate art as well. It's not even like it's the actual regular version. It's the only version you get. You can get the regular version that has all the normal nonsense on it. If you're going to do an alternate artwork and do a full extension, get rid of the fucking text box. Get rid
of the fucking text box. Or again, put some flavor text in there. So that's one of that is, we've kind of, as we usually do, we start with the premise that we're going to be celebrating something and then we grumble about it immediately. This is one of the things that I kind of think is where they have thrown all these different artworks and all these different styles at the wall. This is one of the things where I think they've kind of fallen short. So they have this promise of all these alternate arts, and they have this promise of all these different alternate styles. And when I say promise, it kind of sounds a bit entitled because they didn't promise us really anything. We didn't ask necessarily for these specific things. They gave them to us and we appreciated them, or we didn't. But once they started in Ikoria rolling these out, there was this idea that they were going to be trying all these different stuff. And I just kind of feel like there is something a little bit lost there where they try to still they were too worried about things not looking like a Magic card, that when they try to make things look like a Magic card, they actually weirdly piss up the function of it.
Surely obviously these alternate arts are pushing Magic into places that haven't been before anyway. The more I think about it, the more it annoys me. So.
Yeah, for sure. But then, I suppose it's because for a lot of these, and this is a big rumble when people talk about things like even just the regular showcases, right? So, just to give a very quick rundown of what showcases were in each set. You had the Fairy Tales showcases in Eldraine, you had the Constellation ones in Theros, the manga comic book styles from Ikoria, you had the Planeswalker specific ones from M21, which I'd already had forgotten existed, where they had each border was specific to the Planeswalker of that color from that set. And then we have for Zendikar, the retro art travel posters, which is the kind of I don't know how to describe the color palette. I wanted to say something like Dayglow, but it's not Dayglow. It's just kind of like contrasting bright colors with the geometric shapes going around there, which are very much inspired by sort of retro travel posters.
It's also got that hedronic effect, hasn't it? It still very much feels like it's it is. It
still feels Zendikar. But the point is that as with anything that's subjective and creative, and people had this idea about when there was just only one art per card, for the majority of Magic, is that people either like it or they don't, or they're indifferent to it, or they actively enjoy having it. So there's a whole range of emotions which people feel towards these arts, and you're never going to please everyone all of the time. And I'm sure that if they did get rid of those text boxes on these flip cards that we focused on for 15 minutes, that
some people would have the same issue.
Some people would have an issue. Or some people would be like, well, it doesn't look like a Magic card. Or, well, why is there not a text box? What about players who don't understand what this card does? It's a new cycle of lands. And, that's valid. But I think, I don't know, is there a single one of these, just talking about the showcases that I just laid out there, is there a single one of these that didn't hit the mark for you in terms of, A, just the aesthetic of it, or B, its relation to the set? Or did they all kind of do it for you?
I'm a combination of, I think sometimes they went a bit too far, but I'd rather them do that. Say, for example, the manga artworks, I can understand why they're polarizing. I absolutely adore them. I also think for some of them, say, for example, Snapdack's a prime example, the text box actually actively gets in the way of the artwork. So I feel like at that point, maybe the function and the the visual side of it and the mechanical side of it didn't necessarily gel together. I think the only one that really didn't do it for me was the core set 2021, because they did something that was, yes, individual and quite cool, and the little stylization behind the text boxes is cool, but you can't really see it because of the text box. So that very much felt like a half baked version, and it was only 2 per character kind of thing. So I feel like that was probably the one that maybe let it down more than anything else. It's almost like the signature spellbooks kind of thing. Like, I think that's a really good idea, because you're essentially adding layering on the flavor. And I feel like I could have pushed it a bit more, because I've already done signature spellbooks for 3 different planeswalkers. I feel like the 2021 didn't push it as far as they could have.
Interesting.
I think that's the only one that kind of gets me. And even then, as I'm looking at it, I completely forgot about the fact that they did the old school blue bordering for the Teferi ones, and then that kind of makes me smile again. So no, I don't think. I'm as always, we're of the opinion that try things. I'd rather you try things and get them wrong than not try things. And I don't think they've got much wrong realistically. I just think they could probably afford to push things a little bit more, maybe.
Interesting. See, now, that as a baseline for, we've always sort of said we'd rather have more and scale back than kind of have nothing to talk about. This is part of the reason why I think in general we've been almost a predominantly Magic art podcast for a year, is because the storyline has been so lacking that there's not been much to talk about, so we've had to rely on something else. Like, just as a little aside, as to more is more, less isn't more. So now that they've got story, we can do whole story episodes, and we'll do a big breakdown of the thing. So I'm glad that they are trying all these different things, and every set they've always tried something slightly different, which is fine. I do agree that the M21 Planeswalker borders, I think it was because it was a core set, right? So they really wanted to hammer home who these characters were, their own individual flavor, and that's why I think maybe, so like the Chandra and the Garruk frames for me were way too cartoonish. I thought the Chandra one especially, and that was also the same one they used in the spell book for Chandra. Just it looked like a Saturday morning cartoon version of what a Magic card should look like. And for me, that was a negative thing. I didn't like the flame graphics, for example.
I don't like the white coloration on the letters, for example, either.
Yeah, it's things like that. Whereas the Liliana one, for example, which, again, I wasn't a huge fan, and this is all subjective, of course, but subtle things like the top of the text box, so where you had the text box, the graphic that split the text box and the artwork was very reminiscent of Liliana's collar that she wears, like the shape of it and the kind of graphics that they used for that, even though they didn't color it in as a gold collar. Whereas with the Chandra one, you had the red border and then this big yellow flame on the bottom. And I just think, they maybe pushed it too far there. And I think using the same graphic that they then used in a premium ancillary product was maybe a bit of a miss. The Ikoria ones, again, like, I do agree with you there. And it's interesting that with Ikoria, I think this is where they pushed the boat in such a great direction, and they really went, right, we are going to commit fully to this manga comic book style, and it's going to be so different to what we've seen in Magic. And there are going to be artists who have been dying to do this style that we want to give these artworks to. For example, Kev Walker, he got to do the Narset of the Ancient Way and really push his style out that way. We're going to get like, is it Andrew Huerta who did Snapdax?
Yeah, Andrew Huerta.
Yeah, Andrew Huerta, who did Snapdax, like a Magic artist that hasn't done stuff for Magic yet, but because he has such a cool style, we want to bring him in for this set, and it was brilliant. My problem with Ikoria is that whilst they went full in for this manga style, and they also, interestingly, used it on the Triome lands and on the Planeswalkers, the alternate art for the Planeswalkers, where in other sets they didn't sync up between the lands, Planeswalkers, and showcases. This one they fully synced up what the style was going to be. Because it was like a real-world media-based artwork, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, I think it maybe was a bit too detached. So, for example, if you look at something like the Constellation showcases for Theros, where they got Jason Engel to all of the constellations. So it was the same artist for all of the demigods and gods in that set got constellation treatment. He also did a Secret Lair where he did all the OG gods.
Yeah.
And then you got Sam Burley to do the lands. I hope it's Sam Burley. I think it's Sam Burley, where it was the constellation lands. Whilst those two art styles weren't exactly the same, they synced up enough and were relevant to the set, but you wouldn't necessarily say that they were like a comic style or a film style of artwork. It was just, that's what a constellation looks like, and it fits into the mythology.
If it wasn't for the fact that the art and the lettering was a different color, you could argue that they would just fit into the set without too much bother.
Exactly. Whereas the Ikoria showcases, and again, like for each individual artwork, I love it, and I have a whole bunch of them, and I think they're great because they're an artwork that's associated with other types of media and other types of fandoms. I think it was just maybe a little bit too detached. And also, this is just a bit of a side issue. Ikoria, I have real mixed feelings. The further away we get from Ikoria, I start to have mixed feelings about the flavor of that set because it was presented as the Kaiju Godzilla set, and it really wasn't. No. It just wasn't.
And it was only because it had yet another real world stylization of a complete other. That's the other argument. But then we've had that before, where we've said that they shouldn't have done both at the same time. But you've got, as you say, two different
the Godzilla skins,
Asian inspired styles. You've got the manga style, and then you've got obviously Godzilla being a Togo, an IP that's Asian inspired. So I can understand why it felt fractured, because then at that point, what is the flavor? Do I look at I even was going to call it Ghidorah then. Do I look at a Luna, Apex with Wishes, a regular artwork, which I think is the best out of the three, personally, obviously subjective. But then do I look at the overtly busy manga style, or do I look at the a bit too kind of, I don't think Ghidorah is too, how do I say the word kitsch, that's wrong. It's almost like too pandering. Like, which one do I think? And out of the three of them, I think the initial one is the most interesting of them, and the other two are kind of like using a gimmick too much. And I guess that's the thing is, does it cross into gimmick territory? And I know that the whole point is that, like, Throne of Eldraine, that is the gimmick of the set, was the idea of making it a storybook and everything, but they did it in a way that still felt like it was generated from magic, not that they were taking something else and pulling it in. Which will be interesting to look at, say, for D&D. I know we talked about this last week about how where's the line between what makes magic and makes other IPs not magic kind of, feeling. Maybe it's a threat of the homogenization of the artwork, where we've been saying this for a while, of how we know that magic has a very specific target, and maybe it's so good at that target now anything that falls too far outside of it doesn't feel like it could be considered a typical magic card, and that's where that line of definition maybe needs to either be blurred or stated more empirically.
But the thing is, though, and honestly, I really don't have a problem with them with showcases and with alternate art, whether it's in a secret lair or whether it's in something accessible that's in the booster packs, for example. And I love this just should be a blanket statement, no matter what we say about how we feel about the artworks. I fucking love that most of these artworks, in fact, all of the ones that we've been talking about, are available in regular booster packs. A-star, please keep doing that, Wizards. Secret layers are fun, but don't make them the norm for alternative art, right? But I think where I would prefer it to go, and I think the line which needs to be towed now that we've seen a whole year of it, is that the alternate art styles, for me, but I kind of feel that this is probably where the game should actually go. If I had a gun to my head, I think my subjective opinion is objectively true, because obviously everyone does. But I think the artwork that comes in the showcase should feel like it comes from the world that it's in. So if you look at Ikoria, I don't think that the flavor of Ikoria really is as Godzilla-y as they presented it to be. And also, do I believe that the manga style and the comic book style came from Ikoria as a plane? No, it was just like a sync up of convenience for real world media that these two things.
It was a lens to look through rather than being self-generated from the set. Yeah,
exactly. Whereas if you look at Eldraine, where they had the sort of fairy tale Germanic storybook sort of artworks, which in Magic has existed for a long time in artists like Nils Ham, Seb McKinnon, and everyone else that's kind of pushing it forwards. And you look at the Theros constellations, where it's the gods who are being looked at through the stars. Those felt like they came from the worlds that they were put in the sets with. And that's to say that the Eldraine artworks weren't all done by the same artist. They were done by many different artists. Some of them had one commission, some of them had two or three. But they still even between the artworks, and some of them looked more like traditionally fairy tale style, some of them looked more like modern fairy tale style. Some of them didn't even necessarily have that kind of idea, but because the border around it, and also that's another thing we need to talk about, is like the bordering of some of these showcases really makes a difference. Like it felt like it came from the set itself. And if you look at the Zendikar retro posters, I think if the border, and this is where the border becomes important, if the border wasn't that kind of core-ish, as in the core race of Zendikar, geometric shape, I think those retro posters wouldn't necessarily fit as well as they have done, because the color palette is very retro, the art style is very retro, but that border kind of sinks it into the world
You
that they're
need
in.
that diamond effect,
Mm-hmm.
that scaling of it and that framing of it. I agree, because that's what grounds it within Zendikar, is that hedronic look, and you're like, oh, okay, Hedron's right, Zendikar. Whereas you look at the manga side of, say, of the Korea things, and you could have done that to any plane. And the thing that's interesting is I'm looking at Mythos of Valdrock at the moment, because it happened to have one of those extended, the zoomed in artwork kind of things. Had they done all of them kind of like that, where it is a mythos, it's almost as if someone's done a cave painting of it, and you can still do it in a rudimentary manga kind of esque style, because some of them were much more felt very much more like, say for example, my Grutu Greathorn is a good example of where it does feel like someone who's basically doing a more basic stylization rather than deliberately making it overt. They're going, well, that's just how people would have drawn, like how cave people would have drawn. And had they done that for all of them, and all of the mutate ones are these ideas of this myths that you have to kind of almost write down, and it's almost like, again, a traveler's guide, of where you go, oh, okay, we went out and we found this crazy beast. Let me draw it down for you. And then the drawing that they wrote in their expedition book, that's the one you get. And it obviously is going to be a bit more, cartoony and more basic. Fine. I think, yeah, once you get a little bit further, like, say, for example, like Lord Drakus is a really good example of one by Huerta again, but it's completely different to Snapdax in terms of its visualization. It's a lot less caricaturish. It's still got much more soft lighting, kind of feels more grounded in the world. Whereas all of the other ones, that 2D effect, it does kind of make it feel less in world and more fan fiction, I guess.
It's interesting with the Ikoria ones. It sounds, and at this point, it kind of sounds like we're really ragging on Ikoria. Again, fucking loved the artwork.
Oh man, yeah, I've got so many cards from it, and I love the art style a lot.
Absolutely,
objectively, yeah.
It's not a comment on whether the art was good or not. I think this is just where, like, now that we've had all these different styles, this is where I think Wizards could afford to maybe like tighten things up a bit, because that's what you do when you experiment. You experiment, you see what works, and you see what doesn't work. And even if you like the happy mistakes or the happy things that maybe don't work in the long term, then you still can appreciate them. It's just they might not be the way to push forwards. The thing that was really interesting about the Ikoria showcases, and it's just what we've been saying, is that they were borderless and they didn't have a frame, so it was just the artwork with the text box and the name box. And what was even weirder about those, if you notice, is that on the uncommon cycle of mutate creatures, they had the black border at the going up the sides and the top of the card. And I think they all had, all of them. Sorry, I'll re-clarify. You're right. All of them have the black border at the bottom that kind of fades in. So the uncommon cycles still had the border, just no frame. But then the rare cycles, all of the legendaries and all that kind of stuff, got rid of the black border from the sides and the top. What? That's interesting.
Because I don't know. It's funny, because had I had the choice, had you, again, begun to my head, say, oh, do you want it all the way up to the edge, or do you want it with a border? Without a shadow of a doubt, at like all days of the week, I'd be like, no, make it full, absolutely. Looking at them side by side and thinking about the stylization that's coming from a comic book manga kind of style, which do massively work within borders. There's a lot of artists that deliberately play with the fourth wall breaking of how do you work with the borders of the manga and everything. It actually looks better with that dark border to make it more striking.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree.
Because I would have said otherwise. Like, given the opinion outside of knowing and seeing it, I'd have absolutely said, oh no, do all of them up to the edge. And I think they probably should have just done all of them up to the edge, because giving me an option of both and then actually looking, going, I actually prefer the look of the uncommons to the mythics and rares. That's not necessarily where you want to be.
It's interesting, man. I felt the same way. And whether that's because it does look more like a comic panel or not, I'm not quite sure. Maybe subconsciously it does. But I think it was just, something about the bold contrast of having the black border with the artwork did seem to work. And this is another interesting one. So we're sort of moving away from showcases here slightly, but we're talking about all the different styles of artwork that they've produced. This borderless treatment isn't something that they've exclusively given to the showcases or some of the land cycles when they've tried to test this out. They have just done this for seemingly random, although I'm sure it's not. I'm sure there is some sort of criteria that they have. But they have done this for other artworks as well. They've just kind of given them the borderless treatment to see if it works. So, for example, in M21, you had the borderless staples that they kind of reprinted into the set, which just had the alternate art. So Som Simulacrum, Cultivate, Containment Priest, Ugin, Grim Shooter, Massacre Worm, Scavenging Ooze, all got these different treatments. And also, weirdly, this is maybe a little side note, some of these look like they could have been contenders for double masters. Massacre Worm,
I was thinking the
especially.
same thing of where there might have been some adjustment period of where they went,
Yeah.
well, we've got the full art, why don't we? Because what thing I've noticed, they do it with most sets do it with Planeswalkers, where the Planeswalkers always go full borderless. Not just because of Ikoria doing it the manga style, but they also did it in Zendikar Rising, they also did it in Eldraine, they also did it in M21, all that kind of thing. So, but I know what you mean. It is, I think Grim Tutor did especially one where I'm like, that definitely was supposed to be in double masters, right? And they went, nah, we can put that in a core set.
Yeah, so they've been trying this out, and I do like them. And I've said this before. I've actually said it a couple of times, I'm sure, because I repeat myself all the time. That I wasn't sure about them when I saw them online, and then I got the Solemn Simulacrum and the Cultivate in my hands, and they do look pretty rad. And I also have the Blightsteel Colossus, the Wayne Reynolds Blightsteel Colossus, which he so graciously signed for me as well, which I'm ecstatic about. That in full art, sorry, not full art, the borderless art, I'm doing it myself, does give it that extra something. Even if I'm not 100% convinced on the physical process of it, I have noticed that several of my borderless cards, there's a slight chip in the corner, which is all the more noticeable without the black border for some reason.
Yeah.
Because it cuts into the art.
Because normally, with a black, it's the stark contrast black and white, and you notice it because of that. But I guess it's even worse when you have it breaking up multiple colors across a palette scheme. Yeah,
I think it also happens more. Maybe I've just gotten unlucky, but I don't know if there's something with the printing process. Maybe they've changed it up. I mean, I don't imagine how they would have. But anyway, that's a side thing.
I think it's interesting. We're basically having a board. I think this is an interesting because we want to talk about the art kind of thing, but really what we're doing is we're having a border conversation.
Yeah.
Because I've got a big thing to say about whether or not the bleeding effect extended artworks that kind of take the artwork and zoom it in and push it to the outside with this kind of almost like vignette approach to it. I think, and I don't think this is necessarily too controversial, but I think that all rares should have the bleed art effect. Anything that's a rare or a mythic that doesn't get interrupts, like say Planeswalkers might not necessarily work because their framing is a bit more necessary. But looking through all of them, I'm like, I don't understand why they don't just do that for every rare or mythic. They already put the little hologram at the bottom, and it does. I find it a bit intrusive sometimes, but the more I look at it, the more I think it's worth. I don't know, I feel like a rare or a mythic should have that little bit more artwork, that little bit of a difference in terms of bordering that isn't just a little holographic at the bottom. And the more I think about it, the more I think it's true. But again, objective subjectivity.
Interesting. I disagree. I actually disagree. Well, no, I think we agree on a lot of stuff. I disagree with you on this one. So my attitude towards these, I'm going to call them stretched arts because this is my first issue with them, right? They're not extended. They're stretched, and they're made. My headcanon reason and the way that I'm not getting angry about it, the way I'm kind of justifying it to myself, is that because artists don't artists don't illustrate. They finger paint. Artists don't illustrate in one aspect ratio on the canvas. So my headcanon is that the reason that they've chosen to extend all these artworks to push them to the edges on these rare cycles rather than just cutting out the border and having the extended thing because maybe some of the artworks have already gone up to as far as the aspect ratio is,
and they might as well use it.
Yeah, so they've already done that on the regular art card. So to do that for some of them and then not for others may be an odd choice. I actually feel like that even if that was true, that they would probably still just do it for some and not for others if that was their thought process. What I actually think they did is that they would just started off being very lazy and that they continued it on. I would say I don't understand why they've done it for all of the rares.
Yeah, I don't like the fact it's a middle ground between an alternate artwork and the regular card. And at that point, it's not from a stylistic point of view, because I think stylistically it would work, but that's kind of not the point. I guess the heart of the point was that if you can potentially get the normal rare and then you can get one that's ever so slightly different, and then you can get one that's completely different with alternate artwork entirely, that middle one feels completely unnecessary. Either your base level should be that already, or you shouldn't have the bit in the middle before the alternate art. I feel like there shouldn't be the three versions of it. Where you have the regular rare, the bleeding effect, the stretched artwork, and then an alternate artwork as well. Whether that be full art, borderless, whatever the fuck it wants to be for the set. The fact that you have that middle ground in between, I feel like is you kind of having your cake and eating it. And I understand from a play perspective, sometimes you might want just a normal magic card. You might not want the bleeding effect, and you might not want to have to pay the extra £20 for the super cool, promo version.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if you are going to go to the effort of printing all of the rares twice, one with the normal artwork and then one with this extended artwork, not only is it saving you time and equity, and process and all that nonsense, but it's also creating less of a dissonance between all the different versions that you can potentially open in a pack.
Yeah, I do agree with you that the legendary creatures do look like, especially if you're playing Commander, if you're in a format like Commander, right, and you have your Commander in the command zone and visually on the table, having that card pop just that little bit more with the extended artwork, it kind of gives you the stretched artwork. Sorry, it kind of does give it a bit of gravitas. So I do agree with you there that I think it works for them. I just don't think that all the rares. Firstly, I don't think all rares should have it. Secondly, I don't think all the rares in the set should have it. And thirdly, I think that they should sort their fucking life out and stop stretching the art and just give us more art. More is more. Why are you getting rid of the border and then just pushing the artwork out? That's weird. It's weird.
I could see the Legends actually, I do think work better because obviously they've got a different formatting on their border anyway, because it's got the
card frame, yeah.
Exactly. And it's also really weird. Look at if you've got it open, I think you do, the Core Set 2021. Go down to Hooded Blightfang and Curvek the Spiteful. Look at them side by side and tell me why is the aspect ratio different on the card for Curvek the Spiteful?
Yeah,
now you've seen it, you can't unsee it, right?
Yeah, no, it's odd.
So annoying. Odd. So yeah, it's one of those things. I like conformity within variants. Like I love having variant art forms and everything like that, but I like there to be some conformity and to a degree of justification beyond. Well, we just wanted another version of the card that you could want that celebrates the art a bit more. Does it celebrate the art a bit more, or are you just kind of cheating and giving another version that people would then go crazy over? Yeah. That's the thing is I understand, again, more is more, but I feel like more is more up to a point of where then you need to go, okay, so what things worked and what things can we double down on instead of just going here, have 16 different options for your rare.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on just the sheer amount of them, but I think maybe that's a discussion for a different time. Just one last thing before we wrap up, because astoundingly, we've almost hit an hour of something we thought was actually only going to be like a 40-minute chat. The last thing I'm going to chat to you about is where you want to weight your importance between these two options. So with Ikoria, for example, if we kind of take away our thoughts and feelings about whether the art style was relevant or not, they synced up their showcase for the creatures and their showcase between the planeswalkers as well. So all the planeswalkers and all the creatures that they showcased had a similar manga comic style. That's what they were shooting for. Whereas in Theros, for example, they had the constellation for what they were showcasing, so the gods and the demigods. And then on the Planeswalker alternate arts, they didn't have constellations, but they had instead the carved marble statues.
Yeah, because it's like those reliefs that you used to get in ancient Greek and ancient
Rome. Sorry, that's right. They're shooting for more of a relief, not a statue. Yeah, you're right. And the reason for that is a flavor reason, where the Planeswalkers aren't gods or legends even necessarily, which are in the Starfield of Nyx, but they are legends that people tell between each other in Theros. Whereas the art style in Ikoria, obviously they didn't really have much flavor reasons for that art style, so they were able to put it onto the Planeswalkers as well. Now, what I'm asking you is, in your opinion, as someone who does a podcast about Magic flavor, is it more important to have an art style that consistently syncs a set together as one product, or is it better to have art styles across all the things that they're showcasing that fits flavorfully within the world that they are trying to tell?
The second one. For I don't. I take care of it.
That was a 5-minute question for a 2-second answer.
Let me underpin why. Because I literally have Narset of the Ancient Ways sat in front of me, and the alternate art version, and it's probably one of the more. I mean, not going to rag on my Kev Walker, because I actually really like his stylization, but it almost kind of did feel slightly not in keeping, because I guess the manga and the Godzilla style is actually quite difficult to justify. So let's talk about the Theros specifically. The reason I like that is because, as you say, there is in-world justification for the stylization. The constellations, I think, were, in my mind, a little bit boring and safe because they didn't do that many of them. I think it's actually probably the ideal number because you're only doing your cream of the cropping rather than 30% of your product having an alternate artwork, which is, again, maybe comes down to the bleeding artwork, the extended art, which also was in Theros, but we weren't talking about that anyway. But I like the idea that, yes, specifically the constellation artworks for the demigods and the gods were specifically because they were part of the Nyx constellations, and then the planeswalkers are very much from other worlds, and they would have in-world human representations of them. So someone's actually gone and carved the legend of Elspeth. That I think is great. The reason I don't like it is because they also do it with Calix, who was literally formed within the story. No one actually really knows anything of him, so why does he justify getting a relief made of him? That's nitpick flavor-wise. The fact that the Planeswalkers and the monsters don't have a different stylization in Ikoria, I think, is an issue, because realistically, they're not from Ikoria. So anything that relates to Ikoria and defines it in its alternate style shouldn't probably also pertain to the Planeswalkers. Maybe Luca to a degree, because he, for 95% of the story, was an Ikorian. You know, we don't see him once he's left. So for all intents and purposes, the view that we see him as an audience is an Ikorian human, but no other human got a manga stylization. You know, there weren't any like no Cheville, none of the other legends or anything had anything like that. So in that point, it's a question of what were you weren't just going, we want to do manga and let's tick all of the cool cards that can be it. Instead of it's like, well, why are we making it manga? Why is it accentuating the creatures? Is it because it can represent aspects of them that a normal realistic style can? Or do we want to do things like the Snapdax, the Gem Razor, where it's screaming at the camera and it's doing something and making them feel more monstrous? Narset of the Ancient Way doesn't look more of the Ancient Way because she's in a bit of manga. In fact, if anything, it makes her feel less mysterious and it takes away from her lore, I think. And the same with Vivian. I think it kind of takes away from that. I think Planeswalkers in general, I think alternate artworks kind of maybe sometimes don't do them justice, because usually the aspiration, the way that people do them, they usually do them in a stance looking very bold and interesting. But I don't necessarily think that they need to have that extra-ness of them, because realistically they aren't of the plane. And if they're not of the plane, they shouldn't have the of the plane alternate treatment.
Interesting. For the most part, I very much agree with you. I was just interested because there is a duality there, and both options are relatively valid. I mean, we don't really have much time to talk about it, but I suppose the in between of those two ideas is doing the David Raposa style Zendikar alternate arts for the Planeswalkers, where he's done the Planeswalkers in essentially just another Planeswalker pose, but doing a background which shows their adventures on the plane which the alternate art comes from.
Precisely, yeah. And a story within itself.
Yeah, maybe a bit too much to try and translate onto a card that is going to be 70% covered up.
Because you can't see half of it anyway,
Yeah, but the idea is nice. And when it comes to the art, it's really all about the thoughts and the feelings than the actual end product, really. So there you go.
Of course. Yeah, I think the only thing that's weird is when I look at the Theros constellation compared to the relief is that there is such a dissonance in the art style. And then you look at the entirety of Ikoria's alternate treatments and the dissonance is exceptionally extreme. So, everything from Mechagodzilla up to, Snapdax, this art style is so converse, which I don't think again is a bad thing. I mean, we always say more is more, and I think they learned with Ikoria that was probably the furthest you can push a set. And it is also interesting to think that most of this all came from the Japanese stylizations of the Planeswalkers from War of the Spark, which I think for the most part were unanimously celebrated. I think the only thing that people griped about is they weren't able to get the cards in English in that style. And even then people have mocked them up online, so you can proxy it if you want to. But it did all come from this, doing something completely conversely different and then trying to find somewhere in the middle ground that resonates the right amount,
Yeah. It's just, I mean, this whole discussion that we've just had is so broad, because they have, with every set, even with the stuff that they've kept quote unquote consistent, they have changed them in their own way. And each set that we've gotten so far, and honestly, I think we'll probably still get for at least another year, has been its own unique thing. And there is also something to be said for whether we want them to standardize it across the sets, like whether we do want them just to try one approach when thinking about alternate art styles, or whether it is just good for them to keep being different all the time. It's interesting. My player brain and my sort of brain of going, I want to keep Magic the Gathering like legitimate as a seriously sort of fun but also complex game. My player brain wants me to try and keep them consistent. My Vorthos flavor, I love Magic fantasy art brain goes, I'll just do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah, right. I'm interested to see what they're going to do over the next year, because we've got some cool sets coming up. And I'm interested to see if they do continue with this ethos, which I think by now they will have. I think even Ikoria technically would have come out halfway through development of like Strixhaven and Kaldheim and Strixhaven. So I think we are still going to see cool variants. I don't know if they might calm it down by the time we get back to Innistrad again. Maybe they calm it down for Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe they do something completely off the wall for Dungeons and Dragons. My concern is if they go too far and things do start feeling, even to me, not caring about the whole does it look like a Magic card thing. If the game does start to feel like it's that I feel isolated away from the cards and they do feel a bit detached from each other, then yeah, maybe they'll start to be a problem. But I think they have to go pretty far for that to happen for me personally.
Sure. I agree. And I hope what they learned from Ikoria, my biggest takeaway, is that putting too many variants in a set is actually maybe a little bit detrimental.
Especially with the same cards.
Yeah, those Godzilla skins, as much as I really love that I was able to get my hands on some of them. Well, I mean, they came in the collector's boosters, right? So they weren't hugely accessible, but they were still like maybe more accessible than putting them in a secret lair. But maybe actually, if we're really brutally capitalistly honest about it, maybe those did belong in a secret lair.
Yeah,
but that's a chat for a completely different time, and I think it's a chat we've probably already had.
We did kind of already have it, yeah, when we talked with Flavourful Mike. So if you want to hear more about that, go and check that episode out.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. We do touch on a lot of these things. The episode is, I think it's in the 20s. I can't quite remember. It's either 24 or something similar, where it's Alt Art Talk with Vorthos Mike. Do go check out that episode for when we were chatting around the time Ikoria dropped and Secret Lairs were kind of hitting their peak of discourse. So yeah, guys, if you do want to chat to us about Magic Flavour, whether it's about showcases or the lore or about anything really, you can hit us on Twitter at mtflavouring. My personal Twitter is at Andy Manface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. I'm going to pop a link in the description below for an article I wrote that is up on our friends at Dice Try's website. Dice Try is another content creator that does a lot of Vorthos content and focuses mainly on things like color theory, which is something we're very interested in, but they go real deep on it. So do go check those out. The article is about the top 5 most flavorful legendary creatures from the year so far, because again, I'm not going to be including Commander Legends in anything I do like that because it's just way too much.
It's going to be a month of episodes, I can feel.
It will be its whole own thing, so we will tackle Commander Legends when we get there. Other than that, Nathan, do you have anything final to say?
No, we didn't talk about expeditions.
We didn't talk about expeditions. I mean, expeditions, I think, are such a divisive topic in their own right as to whether the expeditions are even a thing which should be in Magic anymore.
Why is it always the lands, you know? Why is it always the lands that are most divisive? Stupid lands. You know what? I petition for the need to remove lands from Magic. I guess the Pathways are a really good example of that. Of one step towards every card in your deck being a spell, technically.
Well, then we're playing Hearthstone, and I don't really want to.
Oh, you said the word. Right, on that bombshell.
All right, guys. As ever, thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.